Okay, wonderful. We see the participants starting to pop in here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Christine Girardi, Assistant Curator at the Niagara Falls History Museum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to Not at the Museum Thursday nights. As usual, I would like to begin our program with a land acknowledgement. The Niagara region of Ontario is located on the traditional shared territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan peoples. The Chinootan people have called these lands home for thousands of years, and more recently, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee have been sharing the land as one dish, one spoon treaty territory. So welcome to Reclaiming the Narrative, Black Archives at the Archives of Ontario. Tonight, I welcome Archives of Ontario archivist Melissa J. Nelson for a talk on the power and potential of Black archival collections. Melissa positions these collections as tools for empowerment that allow Black record creators to reclaim the historical narrative. This talk celebrates Black record creators who documented and passed on their life stories. A little bit about our presenter. Melissa is an archivist, writer, and educator based in Toronto. She is currently an archivist at the Archives of Ontario. Her work centers on Black being and belonging in the archives to support collective healing and liberation movements. She holds a Master's of Information Studies at McGill University. She also completed a Bachelor of Arts honors in history with a minor in sociology from Carleton University. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Melissa.
Hello, thank you so much for that warm introduction, Christine.
I'm just going to do one more housekeeping thing before you get started.
Sure.
I just wanted to mention to everyone that we will be open, or Melissa will be open for a Q&A following her talk. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us on Zoom. If you happen to be joining us on Facebook Live, just put them in the comments section and I will read them out at the end of the lecture and we'll get all those questions answered. All right, I'm going to disappear and let you begin.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. As it was mentioned in my introduction, I'm currently an archivist at the Archives of Ontario. So more specifically, I work in the Collections Development and Management Unit. So I appraise, describe, and care for archival materials. I also work with Black archives and build relationships with Black communities in Ontario. So if you're not familiar, Black archives are archival collections that document the lives of Black people. The term archives can be used to describe collections or repositories of information. Archives exist in spaces all around us. So today I'm going to explore 3 Black archives that are held at the Archives of Ontario, and I'm going to discuss how these materials represent a reclaiming of the historical narrative. So just a bit of background on who we are. The Archives of Ontario was established by the Ontario government in 1903 in response to public demands for historical records repository. We collect, preserve, and provide access to records that document Ontario's history. Our mission is to document the history of Ontario and Ontarians in all their diversity. Our collection includes records from the Ontario government and the general public. We acquire government records through record schedules, which is a policy that determines a record's disposition. And we acquire non-government records, which are also known as private records, through donations from individuals, businesses, and organizations. These records help to illustrate the history and development of Ontario. The Archives of Ontario is the largest provincial archives in Canada, but it was built predominantly from the perspectives of the wealthiest and most privileged in white society. Many of our records were created and collected through extractive colonial processes. This means there are a lot of gaps in our collection. The voices of marginalized people are often missing from the historical record. This has caused harm and contributed to mistrust in our institution. Over the last few years, we have shifted our focus to breaking down barriers and building trust. This work involves rethinking our acquisition policy to accommodate more diverse records and offering support to communities to build relationships and address their unique archival needs. In recent years, we have been working to amplify the voices and stories of communities who have been underrepresented in our practice. We have acquired several Black archives that are rare and how they document Black life in the Canadian context. We have digitized and promoted several of these collections to encourage community engagement. So I'm going to delve into 3 Black archives that are held at the Archives of Ontario. Archival records that depict Black life are often captured and described through the white gaze. This gaze is formed through acts of exclusion, possession, and violence. As a result, there is an overrepresentation of Black trauma and pain in archives. Black people often appear as nameless objects, stripped of their humanity. This requires us to read against the archival grain in search of ourselves. This is why Black archives are so powerful. They disrupt the homogeneity of the archives. They insert the voices of Black record creators who made deliberate and conscious choices about what moments, what memories they wanted to give permanence. Their body of records represent a refusal to be misrepresented, erased, or forgotten. Through their lens, we can encounter the nuances of Blackness in place, space, and time. These photographs are from the Alvin D. McCurdy Fond, and by fond, I am referring to a group of archival materials that share the same creator. So Alvin was a historian, a genealogist, and a collector of Black history materials. Essentially, he was a community archivist. Black people in Southwestern Ontario trusted him to care for their family records. Alvin protected these records from erasure at a time when institutional archives were uninterested in Black history materials. His collection is one of the most important sources for understanding Black communities in Ontario. The collection documents many generations of continued Black presence in the province. The photographs date from the 1850s to the 1980s. The records document Black church activities, Black education, and Black cultural and family life. They demonstrate how Black people have embraced joy, despite the ways they were devalued and dehumanized. The collection was inscribed in the Canadian Commission for UNESCO's Canada Memory of the World Register in 2021. This register promotes the rich diversity of the country's documentary memory. This inscription of these records further reinforces its significance. These photographs are from the Daniel G. Hill Fond. Daniel was a sociologist, civil servant, human rights specialist, and historian. He became the first full-time director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission to administer Ontario's Human Rights Code. He was also a founding member of the Ontario Black History Society. His collection is a window into his personal and professional life. There are family photographs, both professional and candid, from the 1870s to the 1990s. They document everyday Black life. There is a magic to the ordinariness of these photographs. So often we see images of Black people being active, protesting, performing. But these photographs show Black people just being and living. The simplicity of it is quite beautiful. Our daily lives are human experiences worth celebrating and remembering. These photographs are from the Wilma Morrison Fund. So as many of you know, Wilma was a beloved Black history and heritage activist. She played a significant role in the preservation and recognition of Black history in the Niagara region. Wilma founded the Niagara Black History Association and was a founding member of the Central Ontario Network for Black History. Her collection provides valuable insight into her career and personal life. The bulk of the collection consists of photo albums that document her early relationship with her husband, Lorne. There are also photographs of cherished moments with family and friends. These photographs date from the 1950s to the 1990s. The beauty of this collection is how it captures feelings of connectedness, the candid, ordinary, joyful moments of friendship and love over time. I wanted to share this powerful quote by Renita Shirley's, who is the founder of Black Archives. Black Archives is a multimedia platform that celebrates and explores Black identity and experience through the 20th century. So in this quote, she says, "It is imperative that we collectively reimagine the archive as more than just a register holding the accounts of dead things. We must make space for the multidimensional lives of Black folks beyond just the metadata. We must view the archive as a living extension of ourselves and listen for the breaths while counting the heartbeats beyond the unknown, the unnamed, and the unspecified." So I ask you, how can we reimagine the archive? One way we can do this is through exploration and discovery. Archives are spaces for people to discover, explore, and imagine. Research in archives can be more than creating a publication. It can be deeply spiritual work. It can mean finding oneself, reconnecting with ancestors, or bringing about collective healing. When we engage with the archives, we develop deeper connections to the people, places, and events represented in the records. This is an image of Diana Bowen's exhibit titled "Black Drones in the Hive." Diana created clusters of historical documents, illustrations, and publications. She drew from local and international archives. The exhibition features a few images from the Alvin D. McCurdy Fund, which I mentioned earlier. The exhibition is a testament to Black presence in Canada. It weaves together narratives of migration, erasure, power, dispossession, and remembrance to create a fuller human picture of Black life in the Canadian landscape. So what I hope you all take away from this presentation is the importance of us taking control of our narratives. As Black people, we need to document and preserve evidence of our existence. Archives play an important role in ensuring Black histories are preserved and available for future generations. Archives allow us to uncover stories that would otherwise be forgotten. However, we must challenge the negative representations and absences that exist in the archives. We are more than our trauma and our pain. The public needs to see representations of Black joy, Black love, and Black ordinariness. Representation matters. So if you have records, consider donating them to an archive. If you would rather maintain ownership of your records, you can work with an archive to microfilm or digitize items so you maintain the originals and the archive has preservation copies. You can also preserve your records yourself and make them available. Social media platforms, websites, or collaborations with an institution can bring your records to new audiences. Your records, they hold value. It shows how Black people lived. It speaks to the fullness of our humanity. You are agents of change who are shaping the historical narrative. Today and generations from now, your records and the stories that give them meaning can inspire and impact others. There are transformative possibilities when we preserve records of Black life. So let's work together to keep our archives alive. If you have any questions about how to care for your records, please feel free to contact me. I'm also happy to provide advice and help you find an appropriate home for your records. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with our community your expertise. And that quote was very powerful. The idea of
Yes.
archives and by extension, I'm going to say museums as well, being a living extension of ourselves. That was really lovely. Thank you so much. And for sharing your own personal email so people can reach out and
Yeah.
ask you questions about what they should be doing with their own personal collections. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Like I said before, my friends who've joined us, please put your questions in the Q&A. I see that we already have a few. I'm going to start with one from Christine. I would like specific details of how and where to contribute photos slash docs to the archives beginning in the 1950s.
Christine, do you mind turning on your mic and asking the question? Because I would need a little bit of clarity. You want to know how to donate to an archive?
Hold on, I just have to see. I have to give her permission. Just give
Oh,
me
okay.
one moment. Let me just find her in the list here. Christine. Oh, okay, Christine, I've given you permission to talk if you're comfortable doing so.
I am. Hi,
Hello.
Melissa and moderator. Yeah, I've my parents came here in the 1950s to Canada. I've got a lot of we have a lot of photos and documents and stuff from that time and forward. They also had a very interesting way my mom came on the domestic scheme from Jamaica.
Ooh.
So I got a lot
Mm.
of input there. I'm a big historian but buff. Not a historian like you with degrees and all that, but it's one of my big hobbies, and I would love to connect with you at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you. It wasn't mentioned in this talk, but I also started a collective. It's called the Black Memory Collective. It's for archivists, memory workers, and researchers who identify as Black and live in Canada. You can find us on Instagram and LinkedIn, so we can connect and speak more about that. I'd love to learn more about your work. But in terms of donating it to an institution, there may be some institutions that are interested in records about the West Indian domestic scheme. Um, so that's one way of trying to locate appropriate institutions. That was a federal program, I believe. So
Yeah.
Library and Archives Canada may be searching for records relating to that. There might be local institutions that are interested in those stories as well. And if you don't find an archival institution that's interested in your records, I always tell people that doesn't mean that your records don't have, historic value, because they do. It's just that it may not fit within the mandate of the different institutions that you approached. So another thing that you could do is you can digitize your materials. You could do that yourself, or you can send them to a company to get them scanned. And if you'd like to share them, you can start an Instagram. A lot of other individuals have been doing that. Um, um, a member of the Black Memory Collective, his name is Aaron Francis. He has a family archive. He's based in Kitchener, and he put his archive on Instagram, and it's been really successful. He's been collaborating with other institutions to exhibit his family archives. So there's lots of interest in these materials, and some people are just unaware of that, and they just have these materials in their basements. But there is a lot of interest in seeing these images of Black life and Black stories that we don't often see in the archives, that we
Yeah.
don't often see online.
So that was called the Black Memory Collective, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's just so much Ontario or Toronto area, whatever, has changed so much. Even the memories that I have,
Mhm.
they're, long ago, but there's some memories, some spots just in especially the Bathurst area, a lot of things
Yes.
that I have in my head, that I wish I could get out of my head and share. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Christine. Our next question comes from Heather. And Heather, I do see you have your hand raised as well. So perhaps I'll just allow you to talk in case your question has evolved since Christine's question. So Heather, I've given you permission to talk if you feel comfortable doing so.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much. Yes, two questions now. I didn't realize I had my hand up though. I do research, and just wondering, how would you decide whether to go to submit documents to a local archives or to the Ontario archives?
So archives have mandates. So local archives are usually interested in the local history, so things that specifically relate to those places. The Archives of Ontario is interested in provincial history, which is a little bit challenging to define, but it might be something like is relating to an organization that operated throughout Ontario, an individual who produced records in different areas of Ontario. So something that can be defined more broadly as having provincial significance. What are the records that you're interested in donating?
They're more research that I've done, but it is just pertaining to Southwestern Ontario, though, really.
Yeah, if it's relating to a specific area, then I would suggest approaching a local institution.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, Heather, if you want to mute yourself, and we'll move on to the next question from Arika or Arcia. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Do you know what happened to the historical materials that was housed at a Black-owned restaurant in Toronto that went out of business, I think in the 1980s? By the way, I am in the US. Is much of your materials digitized, or will I have to come in?
I'm not sure which business you're referring to, but if it's businesses in Toronto, it's most likely documented in the City of Toronto archives. I would say um, a lot of the Black businesses and communities that existed in Toronto were not being were not documented and preserved as much as other records. And so there are some communities and businesses that you might be able to find some information about them, but it may not be created by them. Because they may not have been documenting themselves, especially as they were going out of business or the community was being gentrified, and they may not have donated it, or the archives in the area may not have wanted it. So there's different reasons why it may not be in the archives, but sometimes you can find information about those communities. For example, newspapers is a great source. Sometimes newspapers would document these different activities that took place in these communities, especially if businesses were going out of business, that might be documented in a newspaper as well. But again, you're more likely to find information about them. In terms of what's been digitized, the Archival Materials collection is massive. So it's not possible to digitize everything. We do, put in an effort to digitize materials and make it accessible online. In terms of Black history materials, we do have a collection on Flickr, on YouTube, and on Wikimedia Commons with Black history materials. So for example, the Alvin D. McCurdy collection that I mentioned is on Wikimedia Commons. Wilma Morrison's collection, some of that has been digitized. It's not quite ready to be put online, but it will be put online this year.
Just relating to that question that you've just been answering, Christine has chimed in to say, was the caller referring to the Underground Railroad restaurant?
Oh, maybe.
Erica, thank you for, I'm sorry that I mispronounced your name. Erica, I'm going to unmute your microphone and allow you to talk in case you'd like to add a little bit more. But please don't feel like you have to. Okay, so perhaps it was the Underground Railroad restaurant. So Erica, perhaps you can look into that if you decide to go and search through the Toronto archives.
I think there was a researcher that was that did come up in a talk that I went to, but I can't remember. I think there was a researcher that was like uncovering information about that. So I think there is some documentation. I would look in the City of Toronto archives, at least ask them. They may know where you can look instead
Hi,
if it's not with them.
can you hear me?
Oh, hi.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you now.
Okay, yeah, this particular restaurant, it may have been the Underground Railroad restaurant. And what I was told was that they displayed. So when you went to the restaurant, they had on display, various artifacts pertaining to African Canadian history. But that was told this by my cousin, who grew up in Canada. But she said that, they went out of business. So when I asked her, I said, okay, so what happened to the artifacts? What happened to all the stuff that they had this on display? And she said she didn't know. And I'm like, oh my God. So
Yeah.
that's why I was asking. But I do think that was the name of the restaurant, the Underground Railroad restaurant, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I apologize because I said, oh my God, I'm asking you a question about Toronto, and this is the Ontario Archives. How USA of me. But
That's okay. I'm
anyway.
based in Toronto. So that's fine. Yeah, I do know about that restaurant, and as I said, I think there was a researcher that was uncovering some information about that restaurant. So I think there is some documentation, but it's possible that some of the documentation stayed with the owner and his family. So sometimes researchers have to go to someone's home and do research because they decide to keep these materials instead of donating them. So sometimes that happens as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Christine has also chimed in just on the same thread that she visited that restaurant often as a kid as well. So nice little connection here. We have a next question from an anonymous attendee. Will there be a recording or transcript of this webinar made available? And I can answer that one. Yes, we are recording this webinar and it will be posted on the Niagara Falls Museum's YouTube page. It will likely be up tomorrow, and I will also be posting it on our Facebook page as well. So you can just check back in a day or so, and it will be there recorded for you to watch again at your leisure. We've got another question from Amy. Are you aware of any archive organizations on the other side of the river in Niagara Falls, New York? If not, do you have a startup guide to replicate what you are doing in Ontario?
If I'm understanding this question, you're asking if there's archives in New York that I'm aware of. I am not familiar with many of the institutions in the States, but I know that there are archives in the States, and I believe there's also state archives, which have a similar function to provincial archives. To answer the second part of your question, a startup guide to replicate what you were doing. Do you mind turning on your audio so that you can ask this question? What specifically are you referring to when you're asking about the work that I'm doing and being able to replicate that?
So the categories you had of Black love and the ordinary life was really interesting to me. I work for the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center, and I'm doing a lot of research just on the area as a whole. And when I come across Black history, especially in newspapers and directories, it's not in that complimentary way, that you're talking about. And so I love what you were those beautiful categories of showing it a different way. So I think something like that for our organization, maybe down the road, to have those kinds of archives created or to be able to find those here in Niagara Falls would be just phenomenal to tell that story.
Okay, so what I would say is, you have to start with building relationships with the Black communities in the area, and you have to see it as, you're building relationships because it's something your institution should be doing to repair past harms, to repair exclusionary activities that had happened. It's not that you're building relationships because you just want to take records from them, right? You want to build the relationships to repair the relationships. And when you do build relationships with communities, one, that can take time. Sometimes it can take years. And then also, when you build relationships with people over time, they may trust you enough to allow you to care for their records. And you have to also expect that they might have conditions. They might say, I don't want to give you certain records because those ones are really precious to me, or, I only want you to take scans, or I want you to digitize these, or I don't want you to digitize these. They might have different conditions. So just understanding the different communities that you might be trying to build relationships with and being open to it taking time.
Okay, thank you. That's fantastic. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So if anybody else has any questions, we still have plenty of time. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A if you're joining us on Zoom, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live. I am monitoring that on my phone. Please feel free to put the questions in the comment section there. I have a question myself.
Sure.
Part of this talk was obviously a plea for people to reach out, to donate to local institutions or to the archive in general, or to just share their stories in general. And I think maybe something people might be wondering, are there any issues of privacy and trust when they're donating their items to an archive?
Yeah, I think, I always tell people you don't have to donate to an institution, but understand that that's an option. I think a lot of people are unaware of, what's going on in the field, right? A lot of institutions were created within the context of colonialism, but over the last like 5 to 10 years, a lot of institutions have been experiencing a transformative shift. They're becoming more community-centered. They're changing the way that they're doing their work, and they're seeing the importance of building relationships and seeing that as something that's their responsibility, that's their role, is to have relationships with different communities, to play a supportive role instead of just being extractive and taking from communities. And so I think, for those who are concerned about issues of trust or privacy, Get to know different institutions, understand what is their mandate, who are the people who are working there, what are their values, because there's so many different archives that exist in different institutions, and there might be institutions that, you know, you agree with their mandate, you like the people that work there, you like their values, and then through that you can take your time and slowly build that level of trust with them. And you can also decide, you know, to set the terms of your donations and say, you know, I want this to be digitized or I want this to be private. You can set those terms, and also just understand, you know, um, what is the process when you are donating materials. Really equip yourself with knowledge. There's a lot of information online. And if you feel, you know, overwhelmed with the information, please reach out to me. Happy to have a chat with you and explain, you know, your options. So really just, you know, trying to equip yourself with knowledge and taking the time to learn about different institutions.
That's excellent advice. Thank you so much. We have another question that's come in from an anonymous attendee. I am a PhD candidate at UBC working with Black birthing people's stories that currently live on a podcast. The podcast producers and I have started to think about how this collection of birth stories might become more widely available. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think preserving it in a podcast does work in a way, but if you want to make it accessible in a different way, you can create a website, and there are different, I'll call it plugins that you can get for oral histories. So there are a few companies that have created plugins for oral histories that include things like transcription, and that's definitely an option if you want to display it that way. You can also think about possibly setting up the website so that it links to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, for example. That might be an option as well. But I think, you know, you have the recordings, and that's a lot of material to work with. Also, any other information that you can give as like contextual information, you know, if you took any notes when you were doing your interviews, if you had any notes on the types of questions that you want to ask, you know, your process for creating the questions and doing the interview, all of that is important information as well that researchers would really benefit from.
Excellent. We have another question from Erica. What about historical records? What holdings does your institution have for scholars researching the history of Blacks in Canada? In other words, what primary sources collections do you have there than the ones you have featured tonight?
Yeah, the Archives of Ontario does have other Black collections. So I recently created a Black Histories Research Guide, which you can find on the Archives of Ontario's website. And it lists all the Black collections that we have, and also lists other collections that document Black people, but it's records that are about Black people, not created by them. So it's a very comprehensive research guide. And there's also a Black History resource page that's a more introductory page to understand what kind of collections do we have, what is digitized and what's online, what exhibits have we created. And I can share that with Christine, and she can send that out in an email as well. But we do have other collections. But, you know, as I mentioned, the history of our collecting practices means that we don't have as many records as we should have. But we do have records, and the fact that they exist is very important, and we should be using them and amplifying them as much as we can.
We have another question from an anonymous attendee. Are some of the long-standing Archives of Ontario's online exhibitions being reviewed, reframed, and reimagined? For example, the enslaved Africans in Upper Canada.
Yes. That exhibit in particular is being updated, and I believe it's going to be published in a week or so. But that one was reviewed recently, and I helped to update that one. I agree that that one needed to be updated. There was some language in there that was very outdated, and it was written in a very different context. So when we updated this one, we collaborated with the Ontario Black History Society. We used the research that they did in our archives as the foundation for the text. And I have done some research on slavery in Upper Canada as well. So I have some knowledge. So I was able to write some of it as well.
Excellent. I think that's a good segue into my next question, which is, are there any other projects that you're working on at the archive that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so I have 2 workshops at the Archives of Ontario. So one is called Visual Journaling with Black Archives, and the other one is called Dreaming with Archives. So visual journaling with Black Archives, I created that for Black artists and creatives. And it's an opportunity for them to come to the archives, learn about a few of the collections that we have, Black collections that we have, understand the importance of Black artists creating artwork that's inspired by Black archives, learn how to do research in our archives, and then they get to do a visual journaling activity inspired by records that they see in the workshop. The Dreaming with Archives workshop is a creative writing workshop. So I am reframing the way many of us see archives. So I know that there's a lot of Black people who see archives as just collections of dead records. So I'm reframing the way I see Black archives as collections of dreams. And it's a creative writing workshop where participants think about this concept of Black dreams, Black futurity, seeing these collections as collections of dreams, and they get to write about their own dreams, connecting it to the dreams that are documented and captured in the records. I'm also working on an exhibit. The exhibit is going to be called Reclaiming Black Memory. So the Archives of Ontario has a gallery space. And so we're going to update that space, refresh it with a new exhibit. And so Reclaiming Black Memory is going to focus on the experiences of Black people as told by Black people. We really want this to be a collaborative initiative. So we want to include the voices of communities who have records, who feel comfortable sharing their materials in this exhibit. We have already connected with a few people who are interested in being involved. And this exhibit is really part of an initiative to bring more awareness and start more of a conversation about Black archives and Black history in Southern Ontario. So yeah, I'm really excited to be working on all of these projects. And if anybody wants to learn more about them, if anyone's interested in coming to the Archives of Ontario to do the workshops or to collaborate with the exhibit, please get in touch with me.
Amazing. All right, we've got a few more questions. This is amazing. We usually don't get so many questions with these lectures.
This is
I'm loving
awesome.
this discussion. It's fantastic. Amy wants to know, are there any books you would recommend on anything related to this discussion or other books that you have enjoyed or learned from?
Ooh, so I have been finding a few books to help me with the exhibit. So Bell Hooks has a book, I believe it's called All About Love. So that one's about Black love. And then there's a book that came out, I believe, last year called Black Joy Project. And yeah, so there's several books about Black joy. There's a few books about Black love. Oh, and then there's a book about Black rest as well from the Nap Ministry. Um, and that one is called Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto. Um, I haven't dived into any of these books yet, but they're all on my list to read, and they're all interesting topics that, I mentioned in this talk that really deserve to be delved into more.
Erica just chimed in, Trisha Jersey is so good.
Yeah.
And then we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for this wonderful, inspiring presentation, Melissa, and I echo her thoughts. What thoughts do you have about engaging young people with Black archives? And she indicates that she's a middle school teacher.
I think with that age group, I think they would be curious about seeing original materials, but also from just hearing from, Black people who are doing this work, whether or not they consider themselves an archivist, people who work with Black archives. I would suggest having like a round table or having some sort of, kind of informal conversation for them to listen to and to ask questions. Just talking about, how do they see archives? How do they see the past? What are some ways that we can think about this different? How can we reframe this? And also, you can, if you live near Toronto or you don't mind journeying to Toronto, you can come to the Archives of Ontario. We do tours all the time, and we have student groups come all the time to learn about the work that we're doing and to learn about Black history in particular. So also taking them to an archive could be a great opportunity for them to get a different perspective.
I actually, when I was in high school many moons ago, I had the opportunity of touring the Archive of Ontario. And I remember being completely floored by the experience. And I mean, obviously I'm a history person. I work in a museum. But it was such an amazing experience. I feel like I never really understood what an archive was, and I didn't know what to expect. And
Yeah.
walking in there, it took some of the mystery out. It made it very real, and very tactile. So it was an amazing experience. So I recommend any teachers out there, please bring your students to archives and museums.
Yeah, and museums. And it's free. It's free to come to the Archives of Ontario.
Excellent. Even better. Christine has chimed in that there is an exhibit at the AGO right now. So
Which one? Life Between Islands? Because I think there's two. There's Feels Like Home, and then there's Life Between Islands. Life Between Islands explores Black West Indian British identities. And there's also, I went to see it recently. There's also a space that recreates a Black West Indian living room space. So the artist is named Michael McMillan, and he calls these installations the front room, and he's had many iterations of it. So I think this is his first time doing it in Canada, and it's incredible. I mean, it's interesting because I think so many of us don't realize how much we're living through history and how all these different objects that we have has so much meaning, carries so much of our memories. And then as things change, those objects are the only things that we have that still contains the memories of that time. And so for him to recreate, these different time periods like the 60s, the 70s, living room spaces, it's just incredible. The wallpaper and the furniture that he chooses and all the little items that he gets. It's so much attention to detail. If you are near Toronto, in Toronto, definitely recommend checking out Life Between Islands at AGO.
That was an amazing recommendation. I feel like
Yeah.
everybody here, if you you've sold me on it. So.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any more questions. Looks like we've come to the end of it. I'm just checking Facebook Live as well. What a lively, fantastic
Yeah.
conversation. This was
Someone has their hand up, sorry.
Oh, apologies. I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Amy, you can unmute yourself, Amy, if you're comfortable doing so.
Yes, a question. I didn't quite hear where Life Between Islands is, and I'm not familiar. AGO or something, like what is
Yeah,
that?
the Art Gallery of Ontario. It's in
Thank you.
Toronto. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent question. Heather. Oh, sorry. No, that's Erica. Erica, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I was reading a newspaper article today about, I guess it's a new initiative that's happening in Canada where they're saying that they're going to start implementing, Black contributions. I guess in the history of, it said grades 7, 8, and 10. Don't know why 9's not there, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity, because I think somebody was talking about, the archives and, children. And I think it's just such a wonderful opportunity. And I'm wondering, how much of this is going to be just simple, textbook learning, and how much of this is going to be experiential, like taking a trip to a place like, the Ontario Archives, or some local archive. Because I just remember when my daughter was doing a research project, I think it was her junior year in high school, and I took her to the college library where I used to teach, and she got to go through the microfiche, and I'm sorry, go
That's
through the
okay.
microfiche, and look at the records. And she said to me, as she was doing this project and having access to primary sources, she said, "Oh my God, mommy, now I know why you love this so much."
Yeah, you make a really great point. I think we need to realize the limitations of the textbook, right? Like we need to be able to learn in different ways, as you said. Um, I think that will happen with time. I think the Archives of Ontario and other archives are slowly doing more educational programming. And so there's more teachers that are realizing, oh, I don't have to just go to the museum. I can also go to an archive. In Toronto, like there's so many teachers that always go to the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum. And, we're trying to say, you can also come to the archives. There's other memory institutions that you can go to for different types of learning and different experiences. So I think that it will happen, but it's probably going to take some time.
And I can answer really quickly. You had asked why grade 9 students weren't involved in the project. And that's likely because here in Ontario, grade 9 students don't actually study history. They focus on geography in grade 9. So there's no social studies course for that grade level, just looking at our Ontario curriculum. So just a little bit. We have one more question. An anonymous attendee would like you to tell a little bit more about your podcast.
Oh, thanks. I was gonna mention it actually.
Excellent.
Yeah, so archives and things. So I started it a few years ago because when I did my master's program and when I studied information studies, I was often the only Black person in my classes. So when I graduated, in my archive classes, so when I graduated, I had this really deep need to connect with other Black people who were doing this work. And so I slowly started to find people online and connect with them. And I started to have conversations with people. And I realized, I can't be the only person hearing these conversations. I have to record them. And if I record them, I should make a podcast. So that's how the podcast started. So I mostly speak to Black archivists, researchers. The season that's coming up this month, I'm also going to start speaking to some Black artists who work with archives. So it's about, Black archives and Black memory work. And yeah, really excited about this work. And it's been a real joy having these conversations with people. It's been a great opportunity for me to expand my knowledge as well, because we all come into this work in different ways, and we have different approaches often to doing this work. So it's also a great learning opportunity. Archives and Things is streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon. And I also have an Instagram page for it, archivesthings.podcast.
Excellent. Well, I think everyone here is going to be checking out your podcast very soon. Heather, I noticed that you have unmuted yourself. I just wanted to ask if you had a question before we close.
Oh, sorry, no.
No? Okay, I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity if you did have a question. So, excellent. All right. Well, Erica says, thank you. Great presentation. By the way, we don't teach geography here in the US. Interesting. I think for Ontario curriculum, it's very limited. There's literally only 2 classes that it's taught in. Sorry, I'm a teacher as well. That's why I know the Ontario curriculum, but we teach it in grade 9, and then I think it's like an elective in grade 11. So it's very limited here in Ontario. But anyway, neither here nor there. Melissa, thank you so much for such a lively conversation. This was fantastic. And I think everyone here joins me in that sentiment. And in fact, so many people have indicated that in the comment section. Yep, Heather just says thank you. I think that we've got a great group of people here who are very interested in everything you've had to say and who are ready to continue the initiative of preserving and documenting a fuller and more multi-dimensional view of Black Canadians. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for also giving your contact information for anybody who has further questions or is thinking of perhaps donating something to the Archives of Ontario or to a local institution, that they can reach out to you and ask questions and have someone to be able to walk them through the process. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. And thank you to everyone who asked questions.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, I will say goodnight to Melissa and to everyone who attended. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you all at the Niagara Falls Museum at some point in the future. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.